Without further ado, Tammy Vigue.
All right, thank you. And welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. So, typically, when we're talking about retirement planning, we're talking about financial planning. So, Robert and his team do a great job on that front. And today, we're going to take a little bit of a different perspective on retirement planning and talk about the often overlooked non financial aspects of preparing for retirement. So, I do tend to ask a lot of questions as we go through. So, please do have your chat box open and ready to engage. So, my name is Tammy Vigue. I'm a retirement coach, but I also worked in the pension and investment industry for about 20 years. And so, in the past, I used to help my clients answer the question of, do I have enough money to retire? And today, as a retirement coach, I really help them answer the question of, what am I retiring to? What will my life look like on the other side of my career? And I would argue that the non financial aspects of retirement planning are equally, if not more important than the financial ones. And so, in order to determine whether you have enough money to retire, which is the number one question, probably Robert and his team gets asked, you actually need to know what you want to retire to. What is the life that you want to live? And how much will that cost? So, once you have a clear picture of the life, then you can start to budget and plan for what that life will cost you. So, I have a background in psychology and coaching, and I've been a retirement coach really since 2013. So long time in this space. And initially, when I started retirement coaching, many people would look at me like with confusion, thinking, why would anyone need a retirement coach? But I'm happy to say that we're seeing a lot of research now showing how important it is to plan for the non-financial piece. And I'm seeing clients coming to me more and more frequently, whether they after they've retired and maybe aren't as fulfilled as they thought that they would be, or they are just struggling approaching the retirement transition. So I want to normalize, if any of you feel fearful or worried about leaving your career, that's sort of to be expected. So we'll talk a little bit more about why that's the case today. So clearly, financial factors are important. We need to be able to fund that period of life when we're no longer collecting a regular paycheck, but we also need to be planning for the life that we want to retire to. So, today we'll look at why retirement lifestyle planning is important. And I would argue it's more important today than ever before. It may have been sufficient for previous generations just to focus on the nest egg. That's no longer the case today. So, we'll look at our reality and how it has changed really the nature of retirement, what retirement means today, and what our lives might look like on the other side of our careers. We'll look at the non-financial factors that will influence whether you have a successful or happy retirement. And spoiler alert, they're not just, this isn't just about the money. We're going to look at what are those non-financial aspects that are really important. And then I'll introduce to you a framework that I've developed over the past really 13 years as a retirement coach. And as we walk through the framework, it's a three-pillar framework. I want you to be thinking about, how can I apply this planning to my own retirement plan? So how do I apply these concepts to my own planning? Or if you have others in your life who are approaching retirement and maybe struggling with it, how can you help them? How can you reframe that retirement transition? And then if you'd like to go deeper, I'll invite you to explore some ways that you can work with me in the future. So that's really our agenda for today. Like I said, I would love for this session to be interactive. Feel free to engage with me in the chat, or like Robert said, you can unmute yourself as well. But really, when we're looking at retirement planning, it really has become synonymous with financial planning. So this is Merriam-Webster, the dictionary's definition of a retirement plan: a system for saving money for use during retirement. A system for saving money. So, you work with Robert and his team, that they handle the system for saving money: RSPs, TFSAs, IPPs, all of those things. Those are the way that we plan for retirement traditionally: system for saving money. So it sort of presupposes that retirement is just a financial decision, right? Making sure that we have that nest egg. And so if we think it's just about ensuring that we don't run out of money or that we are saving enough, we've got that system, it really does influence the way that we plan for this period of life. We make sure we have the nest egg, but it influences how we're thinking about and planning for this period of our lives. So I'd like to ask you in the chat, how do you imagine your life after your career? What words come to mind when you think about retirement, this phase of life? If you could choose five, what would those words be? Let me know in the chat. What does it mean to you when you imagine yourself in the future as your retired self? What are you doing? How are you spending your time? What are the words? Carol says travel. Yeah, that's a big one. What else? Let me know. Yeah, Carol also says bored. That could be the case, right? If we're not planning for what it is that we want to do. Shazad, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Shazad, active, that's a great word. Carol says volunteering. Jackie, consulting, volunteer work. Brian is fitness. Shazad, social, carefree. So we're seeing a lot of really positive words coming up. Maybe there's a fear of boredom, perhaps. Skiing, yeah. So activities, hobbies, travel. Sherry says travel, freedom, moving overseas. Yeah, a lot of us will relocate or downsize. Adventure, Brian. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of words coming up. We see travel a lot. We see a lot of hobbies, volunteering or consulting maybe as well. So let's take a look at these words. So we saw maybe a couple of these words coming up. We saw travel. We saw sort of that sense of freedom. Sherry says freedom. Maybe, that sense of adventure, we might say that that's fun or fulfilled. So these 10 words in front of us are significant. And the reason that they are significant is that this exact study was done at MIT's Age Lab. So MIT researchers were interested in how do people envision life after their careers? And so they asked the same question that I just asked you. What 5 words would you use to describe this period of life? These 10 words accounted for a third of all responses. Now, I want you to just pause and consider that most of us, most adults, have a vocabulary size of about 40,000 words, yet we really use just 10 to describe this really significant period of life. It is likely that retirement today will last as long or longer than our full-time careers. On average, we'll have to fill about 8,000 days. And I want you to start thinking about that as like how many of those 8,000 days on average will you be traveling or just, resting? We need to be thinking about retirement in expanded ways. So beyond sort of that stereotypical image of retirement, I don't know if any of you remember those old Freedom 55 commercials, right? Where it was like the main objective was to retire as early as possible and check off all the fun things on your bucket list. Beyond that sort of leisure and fun retirement image that we see in the media, what else might it be? And so I like to talk about retirement now as the ability to do what you want when you want. And for many of us, that will include some form of work. So I know that some of you had mentioned consulting or volunteer work. That may form a part of our retirement, sort of that work identity piece that we carry forward with us. So it may be all of these 10 words and something else. So I want you to think about, what will bring you a sense of purpose? How will you replace the structure of your career? What will bring you a sense of mattering or meaning? And that may be this leisure retirement represented by those 10 words, but it also might mean something else. And for each of us, we'll get to choose, what will it mean for me? It's really designing a personalized retirement life plan. And so some may choose a traditional retirement. I know I'm still working. My husband is retired and he likes that traditional retirement, but I plan to continue working as long as I can because I love it so much. So I want you to be thinking about, well, what will it mean for me? Do I want a traditional retirement or do I want something else? maybe it's an both of those things. And so when the researchers were looking at that MIT study, they were really looking at, we said we have a very limited vocabulary around this period of life. And they went on to say that there are parrots with larger vocabularies than most of us have concerning this phase of life. So we really want to be expanding the definition of retirement to really be aligned with who we are and what it is that we want. They also went on to say that so planners like Robert and his team, may have a new role as curators of possible lifestyles for clients to consider and plan for. So beyond the stereotypical images that we see of the endless beach walks and the daily golf games, how will you curate your lifestyle? What is it that you see yourself doing? What brings you joy and fulfillment? So we really need to be thinking about that and if your identity is really tied to your career and your career gives you status and that sense of meaning, you might want to consider, whether you want to retire or not. So unless you have mandatory retirement, some professions do as part of their partnership agreements. Sometimes I ask people why they want to retire if they're very fulfilled in their careers. So I want you to be thinking about, what does retirement mean for me now? And, when we Google retirement life, we really do see this image, though. This is an exact screenshot of Google Images, and you can see it's entirely focused on that sort of traditional retirement, that rest and relaxation retirement, the leisure retirement. We see happy couples on the beach, daily sort of that the beach walks and the travel represented in the top with the Adirondack chairs and the beautiful locations, family, friends. It's all a very positive vision of retirement. But I would just argue that this image of retirement that we've kind of been conditioned to believe is retirement is perhaps a little bit dated. And there are very specific reasons why it's dated. So our reality is much different than it was for retirees in the past, perhaps our parents or grandparents. And so, when we look at why do we retire at 65? Why is that normal retirement? It was actually introduced in the 1800s. So in the 1800s was the first time that modern idea of retirement was introduced. So Otto von Bismarck gave a pension to German citizens once they reached the age of 65. So it was very progressive at that time. You could stop working and be collecting that government pension. So you could retire at age 65 in the late 1800s. Any ideas as to what life expectancy was in the late 1800s? I'd love for you to type in the chat. How old do you think you were likely to live to? Carol says 70. Good guess, Carol. It's actually lower than that. 75, 62, 64, I'm seeing 63. It's actually even much lower than that. It was 47. So you could retire at 65, but less than 1% of the population actually made it to 65 to collect that pension. So less than 1%. To put that into, yikes, Carol, right? To put that into context, that would be like us retiring at age 86 today. So that idea of normal retirement at 65 is perhaps, something we should question. Like, if you are still engaged in your work and you love your work, then why retire at 65? So we get to really decide for ourselves whether retirement is the right option. You may feel pressure from friends or family to retire, but I would say that if you really are engaged in your work, you may want to reconsider that normal retirement age. So in the past, when retirement was first introduced, it was meant to fund a very short period of life. On average, when in the late 1800s, retirement really lasted about 3 to 10 years. Retirement today could last 30 or more years. The oldest woman in Canada died at age 117. So on average, you're going to need to fill about 20 years or 8,000 days. But for many of us, it will be longer than that. So so imagine that retirement could be 50 years, right? If you retire at 65 and you die in your 100th, 117, it could be a very long period of life. So you can think about this as in the last century, we have literally been gifted another life stage, another 30 years tacked on to the end of our lives. So I want you to be thinking about, what am I going to do with that gift of time? How will I find meaning and purpose? How will I contribute? How will I still matter? And so that, I think, is a real opportunity for us to be thinking about what it is that we want this next phase of life to be for us. There's also a phenomenon called down aging, and down aging is really that expression 40 is the new 30. So 65 today is actually younger than 65 was for our parents or our grandparents. So 65 today is actually young. You know, when you look at people doing really incredible things at older ages, we see that playing out throughout society, right? We see Warren Buffett recently stepped down as chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He's in his 90s. You know, Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin are still starring in movies and TV shows. They're in their 80s. John Glenn went into space, astronaut John Glenn, at age 77. Rolling Stone's still going on tour. They're in their 80s. So we can look at this period of life, instead of thinking about 65 as old, really as an opportunity for us to do the things that we want to do. And for many people, retirement is an opportunity for them to choose what it is that they want to do. Many of my clients have fallen into careers based on pressure or obligation from family initially, or responsibility to take care of their families as they grew their own. And so retirement may be the first time in their lives where they get to choose what it is that they actually want to do with their time. So I want you to think about, what am I going to do with this gift of time? How will I bring my whole self to this next phase of life? And so, to take you back in time a little bit, I'll talk about the origin story of my program. So, as I'd mentioned, when we started, I had a 20-year career in the financial industry. But back in 2006, 2007, I left my career and I started a coaching business. And so my degree is a psychology. I've always been interested in personal development and coaching. So I started a coaching business that was primarily focused on stress management and wellness. And what was interesting was many of the people who started coming to my coaching were lawyers in their 60s. So they were coming to me for wellness coaching, lawyers in their 60s. What was interesting about this group was that many of them had mandatory retirement at 65 as part of their partnership agreements. So they had to retire. Prior to that, having worked at that point for about 13 years in the financial industry, focused on saving and investing, all of those really important things, I believe that if you had a lot of money saved, you'd be looking forward to retirement, right? If it was only a financial decision and you had no worries about running out of money, you could do all the fun things that you had planned on your bucket list, then you'd be looking forward to retirement, right? But that changed for me when I started coaching these lawyers, because not only were they not looking forward to retirement, they actually hated the word retirement. They were talking about retirement as if it meant that they would become irrelevant, invisible, that they would no longer matter, and that they would lose their value. And for me, it was the first time that I realized there was much more to the retirement readiness conversation than just having the nest egg. So yes, we needed to fund that period of life, but we also needed to recognize that a lot of our identity is wrapped up in our career. Purpose is often wrapped up in our career. And so in order to have a successful retirement, we have to plan for a fulfilling next chapter, not just thinking about retirement as an ending of our career. And so since that time, I've been focused on retirement lifestyle planning. So I only focus on the non-financial piece, helping people to define the life that they want to retire to. And so that is really my mission, is to help people that, reframe retirement as a new beginning instead of an ending. And so it is really time to redefine retirement. The word itself, retirement, actually means to pull back, to withdraw, to disengage, right? So if you Google it, those are, if you were to Google the word itself, that is what it means. If you Google retirement, you'll get a billion results. It'll be mainly focused on financial planning, but Wolfram Alpha is a knowledge engine, whereas Google is a search engine. This is a knowledge engine. It synthesizes all the information out there. And this is what it has to say about retire, to dispose of something no longer useful or needed. So no wonder some of you on the line may hate the word retirement. That's pretty normal with people that I coach, like the lawyers that I was coaching initially. Many of us don't like that word, and it really is sort of this legacy. The word itself used to mean to disengage. And if you think about, back in the 1800s, it did mean to disengage. People who retired at 65 in the 1800s were old. That is no longer the case today. We are young and vital. So what are we going to do with that gift of time in retirement? What are you planning to bring to that phase of life? So we get to choose what it's going to look like. But again, I want to normalize, if any of you on the line are feeling fearful or worried about retirement, that is normal. I think we've just not really talked about it until now. In fact, retirement is one of the most stressful life transitions that we'll ever go through. On the Holmes Rahi life stress inventory of 43 stressful events, life events or transitions, retirement is number 10 on that list of 43. To put it into context, it's more stressful than the death of a close friend. It's more stressful than a major change in your finances, like a foreclosure on a loan. And it's only slightly less stressful than getting fired. So I would argue that the reason retirement is so stressful for people is because we've not thought about it as what we are retiring to. We've only thought about it as an end of our careers. So we haven't been planning for the life that we want to live. We've only been planning for the money. But no matter how much money you have, if you don't have a plan for a purposeful life, you won't feel satisfied. So it can be very, very stressful. So I would argue we can mitigate that stress by planning for what's next, being really intentional about what we want this phase of life to look like. So the other thing that I think is really interesting about the way that we've approached retirement in the past is that we've treated it like it's a date on the calendar. So, we set the retirement date. We usually have a party for the person retiring. We give them their gold watch and a handshake, and we send them on their way to their newly retired life. So it's a day on the calendar. We treat it like it's just a change in work, but it's not just a change. It's actually a transition. And change and transition are two different things. Change is situational. In the case of retirement, it means I no longer have to go to work. Transition is psychological and emotional. It requires us to integrate that change into our lives. So letting go of that old identity, letting go of that structure that work provided us, letting go of the relationships that we got from our work, that takes time. Change can happen in an instant, transition can take years. And so by understanding the normal sort of progression or sequence of transition, we can start to mitigate that stress by actually planning for the transition before we ever leave our careers. And so to help you kind of conceptualize transition, I'll introduce you to a model of transitions that was written about by William Bridges. So there's a fantastic book if you're going through any kind of transition, divorce, empty nesting, moving, anything like that. It's called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. And it's a really useful framework to apply to retirement as well. So, the retirement transition really impacts many different things. It impacts relationships, it impacts time management, it impacts identity. And so really we need to be thinking about it as how do we integrate these changes, the transition into our lives. A transition begins with an ending. In the case of retirement, I no longer have to go to work. That's the ending piece. Then there's a neutral period. maybe a sense of confusion. I'm not really sure what I want to do or who I am at this stage now. And then finally, the new beginning. That's the normal sequence of transition, ending, neutral, new beginning. But what happens is we often don't go through the transition in sequence to integrate it into our lives. So we often skip over phases. So what you often see is someone leaving a big career and then jumping into something as a new beginning to just fill their time, because it can feel uncomfortable, right? There's maybe a sense of loss of leaving that career, loss of identity, loss of sense of purpose, and it feels good to do something to be busy. So you see someone leave a big career and then golf every day, or leave a big career and look after the grandkids every day, or leave a big career and go traveling. So that may be fulfilling sort of temporarily, but the underlying transition hasn't been successful. So a transition requires us to really reflect on, in the neutral period, that sense of disorientation. Who am I now? What do I actually want in this next stage of life? What are my values? What's important to me? What are my natural strengths and gifts? What do I want to bring forward from my work into this new beginning? And that can take time. But if you understand the normal phases of transition up front before you retire, you can start planning for that authentic new beginning before you ever leave your career. I often get people in my coaching practice who have retired, sometimes unsuccessfully, multiple times, and they can't figure out why they're not happy. They're doing all the things that they thought they wanted to do. They're traveling, they're spending time with the grandkids, they're picking up old hobbies like playing the piano or whatever that might be, but they're not happy. And when we look underneath why that's the case, it's often because they're just being busy, they're filling their days, but they haven't actually found the piece that is fulfilling. They're not using their strengths or their values or the things that they can take from their career or repurpose from their career. So I say that there is a difference between filling time and fulfilling time. Filling time, you can find a million different ways to be busy in retirement. You can fill your calendar and replace all the hours that you were at work. Fulfilling time will be really unique to you. What are your values? What are your strengths? What are your natural gifts? How do you want to bring that forward? And that's the work of the transition, is really letting go of that old identity to become who you are meant to be. And that is really intentional. It takes some time and sort of an excavation of of who you really are. And when we look at retirement success factors, one of the leading gerontologists has been studying retirement for decades, and he's actually outlined that there are 15 retirement success factors. Only one of those has anything to do with money. It's a sense of meaning. It is relationships with dependents, if you have your kids at home, or maybe you're caring for parents. It's a sense of life satisfaction currently and what you think about in the future. It's how effectively you've been able to replace your career. So many factors that have nothing to do with how much money you have in your retirement savings. So that's the piece that we really need to start addressing when we are thinking about retirement and retirement planning for this phase of life. So typically we've only thought about retirement planning as income replacement, making sure that we don't run out of money, but we also need to think about those other things that we need to replace: meaning, relationships, all of those things that make a successful retirement. And a lot of research is going into the retirement transition. Some recent research came out from the Stanford Center on Longevity, and they outlined that although traditionally we've thought about retirement as a financial decision, that's not actually the case. In fact, the wealthiest individuals are the ones who are most likely to continue working. So it's not just about making sure you have your number. It's also recognizing there are other factors that will influence whether you actually want to retire. So the financial piece is one domain, and we have to answer the question of, do I have enough money to retire? The health domain is also an important one. We have to answer the question of, do I need to retire? Does my health require it? Or does maybe the health of a loved one, maybe I'm having to stop or reduce work in order to care for them. And then the last piece, the one that I address or retirement coaches address, is this lifestyle piece, the psychological piece. And that is answering the question of, do I want to retire? Do I have things pulling me forward into retirement? Am I looking at it as a new beginning instead of just thinking I have to retire because I've hit a certain age? So what are those factors that are pulling you forward into retirement? That's the piece that we really want to be thinking about. What do I want to retire to? And so to help you think about that, I'll introduce you to the framework that I've developed, and I call it the Curated Retirement Life Map. MAP is an acronym for mindset, authentic self, and purpose. So we'll walk through each point on the map. And as I'm doing that, I really want you to be thinking about, how does this apply to me? How can I take some of these concepts and apply it to my own planning? Or if I have someone in my life who is approaching retirement, maybe I could start to have deeper conversations with them and start to normalize some of the natural phases of this transition and what they might be going through. So the M on our map is mindset, and mindset is really your attitudes and your beliefs, the way that you think and feel about retirement. So, when we look at retirement, are you looking forward to it as a new beginning? Are you excited about this phase of life, or are you dreading it? Do you hate the word retirement? Are you thinking about it like the lawyers that I initially started coaching? How do you think about retirement? Is it a new beginning or is it an ending? That's mindset. How do you think about aging? Do you think about aging as inevitable decline, or do you think about it as a period of increased wisdom? How do you measure your success? Is your success measured by your job title or your career, or is it measured by other factors like relationships or peace of mind? That's all mindset. And the good news is we get to choose how we're thinking and feeling about this phase of our lives, and how we think and feel about this phase of life will influence the results that we create in it, right? If I think retirement means I'm going to be disengaged and I'll no longer be valuable, it's very likely that I will disengage and not show my value, right? No longer contribute. If I think about it as a possibility for me to fulfill my potential, then I will take different actions from that place, right? How I think and feel will really influence how the results that I create in this life, what this phase of life becomes. And what we're seeing from the research is that the most successful retirements result from us retiring to a positive vision of what's next. So in psychology, there is a phenomenon called future self-continuity. And what it means is that the stronger we can connect with the version of our best possible selves, the vision of who our best possible self is in the future, the stronger we can connect with that vision, the more likely it is we actually become that version of ourselves. So I want you to imagine, taking where you are today, imagine yourself in the future at 85 or at some older age, and think about, how are you spending your time? What's bringing you joy? What do you like to do? Who do you spend your time with? What brings fulfillment to you? What is purposeful? The more you can start to imagine the person you are becoming, the greater the chances you become that version. So one way to do that is to digitally age a photograph of yourself. So I did this in ChatGPT. You can do that in an AI version. And the research shows that actually, this is research based, that actually influences the way that we live our lives in the present. And so high future self-continuity means we're connected with who we are becoming. We're taking care of that person. So when you have high future self-continuity, you save more money, you're more goal directed, you actually adopt healthy lifestyle habits like exercise and eating well, which makes sense, right? If I know who I want to become, I'm going to take steps today to make sure I become that version of myself. So digitally aging a photograph can be very, very powerful. And also just really getting into imagining who you want to be. Who is your best possible self? You can write about that version and imagine who you are and what you're doing that is bringing you fulfillment and purpose. So that's one aspect of, mindset, imagining who you are, the best possible version of yourself. And the research also shows that our mindset really does impact our reality. So you can kind of think of that. We can see that with the placebo effect, right? If we think a drug is going to work, even if the drug is just a sugar pill, it works if we think it's going to work. So we can see how our mindset does actually impact our reality. And one of the studies that I find just absolutely fascinating is what's called the counterclockwise study. It really speaks to this. It's been replicated many times, but the original study was conducted in 1979 by a professor of psychology from Harvard named Ellen Langer. And what she did was she invited a group of men in their 80s who were living in a nursing home. She invited them to a retreat center for a week. So this is 1979. They were in their 80s, and in the 1979, 80s was old. That's no longer the case today, but she invited them to the retreat center. They get on the bus. They're quite happy to leave the nursing home. They are bussed out, the bus doors open, and the men enter the world of 1959, 20 years earlier. The retreat center was retrofitted as if it were that week in 1959. So the magazines and newspapers were from that week in 1959. The black and white TV played, the hit TV shows from 59, which have been Bonanza and Gunsmoke and The Twilight Zone. The record player had only the hit records from 1959. And there were no mirrors in the retreat center, only pictures of the men as they were 20 years younger. Every day they met to discuss current events of 1959 as if they were happening in the moment. So walking on the moon was still science fiction. They were to talk about themselves, their careers, and their families as they were 20 years younger. So they really time traveled, right? So they went back in time to their 20-year younger selves. By acting as if they were 20 years younger in that 1 week period, they actually became younger. Their hearing improved, their eyesight improved, their memory improved. They scored higher on intelligence tests. And people who looked at photos of this group of men versus a control group in the same age judged this group of men to be younger. So I want you to think about that, by actually thinking that they were younger, acting as if they were younger, their minds turn back time for their bodies. So that's the power of our minds to influence our reality. And yet, so many of us carry around limiting beliefs about what this phase of life means, about retirement, about, our value, about what it means to get older. Kind of not surprising, right? Because we see anti-aging. We've been kind of conditioned to believe that youth is more valuable than aging. We see anti-aging on everything from eye creams to health spas. So, we've internalized some messages around about our value maybe diminishing as we get older and as we enter this next phase of our lives. And I want to normalize, if any of you have, fear or worry about this phase of life, that is sort of normal, right? We've been conditioned to think about it in that way, but it is time for us to reframe this. In 2021, I posted a survey on LinkedIn and I asked people, what is it that you struggle the most with when it comes to feeling ready to retire? 68 people responded to that, and not one of those answers was related to money. It was all related to this mindset piece. So these are some exact quotes from that study. Loss of status, my world is diminishing, feeling that I'll become invisible, fear of not having enough to do. That is this mindset that we need to really question. We need to catch on to ourselves as, have we inherited some limiting beliefs that we really need to reframe? And really, you can kind of think about this as there are two different mindsets. Some of you may be familiar with Carol Dweck's work on mindset. She talks about fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. Fixed mindset is really the belief that our skills and abilities are fixed. We only have so much of them. When we're operating in a fixed mindset, we are reluctant to take risks because we don't want to expose any deficiencies, right? We're more concerned about appearance than growth. And so when we are approaching transitions, a fixed mindset can often be triggered. And when we're looking at retirement, it sounds like this. I'm too old to start the new thing. Maybe you have a dream of starting a business. I'm too old to do it. What if I fail? What I'll embarrass myself. I don't have any interests outside of my work. All of those things, those quotes that I had shown you previously around my world is diminishing. Nothing will ever replace my work. I won't have any value after I leave my work. That's all fixed mindset. And it's just you can think of it as an unhelpful habit that is triggered when we're in transition. So we really need to be aware of how am I thinking about this phase of life? Because we can shift to a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is really the idea that we can learn and grow over time. And the research shows that with neuroplasticity, we can grow and learn over time. The growth mindset as it relates to retirement sounds more like this. I'm willing to consider that I can replace the everything that my career gave me. I'm looking forward to this next chapter. This will give me the time and energy to do the things that I've wanted to do. That's the growth mindset. So for now, start to think about and notice, how am I thinking about retirement? How am I thinking about aging? How am I thinking about my value? Is it, only tied to work, or are there other ways that I feel like I'm mattering and contributing? So that's this really important piece, mindset. And the good news is we get to choose it. But first, you need to be aware of it. How am I thinking and feeling about this? So that's the M on our map. The A on our map is authentic self. And your authentic self is your true and genuine self. It goes beyond the roles that you play. It's not about your career. It is who you are at your core. And it's made up of your values, the things that matter most to you, your non-negotiables, the things that you stand for. It's made up of your strengths, your natural gifts and abilities, the things that come easily and effortlessly to you, the things that people compliment you on. What's interesting in psychology and the research, it shows that although what we think will make us happy is rest and relaxation, that leisure retirement that we've seen, what actually makes us happy is using our strengths in new and creative ways every day. So it's a really essential piece about retirement is like understanding what are my natural strengths and how can I use them in this next phase of life. The other aspect of authentic self is your hobbies, your passions, and your interests. So, typically we've thought of retirement as rest and relaxation, leisure interests, but the reason that leisure time is fulfilling for us when we're working is because it's a contrast to work. So we need that contrast in retirement as well, right? So there's a paradox of leisure. If all your time is leisure time, it no longer becomes fulfilling. So leisure is an important part of retirement, but it's not the only thing. So what are your passions and your interests? Many of the people that I coach are high achievers who've really devoted their entire lives to their careers, or haven't really had much time to explore hobbies or interests outside of work or raising their families. So this can be an important piece to look at in retirement too. Another piece around your authentic self is what I call your work identity thread. And this is the thing the things that you love about your work. So imagine that you were retiring today. So today is your very last day of work. What would you miss about it? So the things that we like about our work are what retirees miss when they leave it. So I want you to start to think about that before you retire, or maybe some of you are retired already. What do you like about your work, or what did you like about your work? Here are some of the answers that I get when I ask this question, but I'd love to hear from you. What do you love about your work? What would you miss if you were to leave it? Type in the chat. Yeah, Sherry says my colleagues. Yep, Carol says the people. Yeah, that's actually the number one thing that retirees miss about work is the relationships, connections. Yep, Shazad says same thing. What else? Anything else on this list that you would miss? Carol says, yeah. Both Carols say helping people, the people. What else would you miss if you left it today? Friends and stimulation of the work I do, Dion. Yeah, sense of purpose. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so all of these things, creative solutions, that's a great one. All of these things that you like about your work will be what you miss when you leave it. So just as we have, the financial plan that Robert and his team is working on to replace the paycheck, you'll also have to replace these other things. So for those of you who said, I'm going to miss the people, maybe it's your clients or your colleagues, then in order to replace that, you'll have to brainstorm ways to do that. So maybe it's really, deepening those relationships while you're still working and bringing those specific relationships with you with those people, or it's starting to develop relationships outside of work. If you know that you're going to miss, Shira says creative solutions, then Shira, what you'll need to do is think about how can I be creative or how can I find solutions in retirement? Maybe it is starting a passion project, or maybe it is mentoring or applying your skills to something that you might have learned in your work. So we really need to be creative around brainstorming. How do I replace that aspect? And so really we can think about retirement as evolution, taking all of these elements of your authentic self and repurposing them in the next app. So what are you evolving away from, or what are you evolving towards? I really think that that's an important question to ask. So how do I replace those aspects of work? How do I bring my strengths and values into this next phase of life? And that's where we come to the P on our map, which is purpose. And purpose, although it tends to be a bit of a loaded word, when we think about purpose, we often think that in order to have purpose, we need to be doing something extraordinary or life-changing, but purpose is actually really simple. The way that I define it, it is living in alignment with your authentic self. So once you understand your values, your strengths, your interests, what you like about your work, it's really about pulling all these puzzle pieces together to brainstorm purposeful activities. You can kind of think of this as a purpose portfolio on the other side of your career that is authentic to you. So if you have a high value around achievement, maybe purposeful activities aren't necessarily going to be, spending all of your time caring for the grandkids. It may be something else. So you really want to start thinking about, what does purpose mean for me? Who am I authentically? And how do I live in alignment with that version of myself? And there's a lot of benefits of purpose. In fact, the number one reason that people go back to work after retiring isn't for money. It's actually for purpose, personal fulfillment. So purpose is as essential as the financial piece. And the research shows that having a strong sense of purpose is so important. It is as important as not smoking for our health. It helps us live longer, on average 7.5 years longer for people with a high sense of purpose, reduces the risk of heart attack and stroke, reduces your risk of Alzheimer's disease by more than half, if you can believe that. Helps you relax, repairs your DNA, even helps you make more money. So purpose, I would say, is this essential piece that is often overlooked when people are thinking about retirement. What is your purpose going to be when you leave your full-time career? What will matter to you? What will bring you a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment? And when we look at what retirees fear is, it is loss of purpose, right? So often people will stay in careers even if they're no longer really fulfilling anymore, because they fear losing their sense of purpose. So if you define what purpose means for you after you leave your career, then you can step forward into your retirement with much more confidence and clarity. So that's the map: mindset, your thoughts and your feelings about retirement and aging and success; authentic self, your values, your strengths, your interests, and your work identity thread; and then purpose is really just bringing all these pieces together to live in alignment with your authentic self. So that's the concept behind the map. And here's how it actually works in real life. So I'll give you a couple of case studies before I open it up for questions. But, I've modeled these after people that I've coached in the past. And so we'll look at, Susan, what she likes about her work is status, identity, accomplishment, intellectual stimulation, and social interactions. Her values are around achievement, challenge, growth, learning, and competition. Her strengths are attention to detail, coaching, organizing, leading, and mentoring. And her interests are running, travel, swimming, cycling, wine, and music. So I want you to imagine that Susan is a colleague of yours or a friend, and she's asking you for advice or ideas on purposeful activities in retirement. How do you think you could combine elements of her values, strengths, what she likes about her work, maybe her passions, into purposeful activities, bringing that alignment? What do you think she might find interesting or fulfilling when she leaves her career as a lawyer? How do you think we could combine aspects of her essential or authentic self into purposeful activities? I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Let me know what you think. What do you think she might like to do? While you're thinking about it, one of the things, a lot of the things that stand out to me when I see a client like Susan, who has a high value around achievement, identity, status, it might not necessarily be that traditional retirement. It may mean mentoring, maybe coaching, starting a business. That might be fulfilling for Susan with that type of persona. Yeah, Brian says coaching her sports, absolutely right. That would give her that sense of organizing, leading, mentoring, coaching, and then also play into her passions and interests. So this is what she came up with, and Brian got it. So train for and compete in triathlons and marathons, organize cycling trips in wine regions, mentor and coach women in law. So when you go through the exercise of, really articulating who am I now? What's important to me at this stage and phase of my life? What do I want to bring forward? All of those aspects of your authentic self, then purpose is actually sort of, it almost emerges organically. Renee says, get involved with the Vancouver Marathon. Absolutely. Yeah, Shira says, participate in triathlon in different places around the world. Yeah, you all got that. And so this is Matt. When we look at his, what he likes about his work, money, time management, defined goals, structure, and social interactions. His values are family, community, contribution, faith, and friendship. His strengths, adaptability, dependability, problem solving, attention to detail, and teamwork. And interests, woodworking, renovating, hiking, biking, music, camping, and fishing. So same question. What do you think Matt might find fulfilling when he leaves his big career as a CEO? How could you combine elements of his authentic self into a purpose portfolio? What might it look like? Let me know in the chat. Some of the things that stand out to me about a client like Matt, values around community, contribution, and faith, that might indicate volunteering for me, that he might find fulfilling, really giving back in some way that way. Maybe involvement in church. Anyone have any other guesses? I don't see any chat coming through. Oh yeah, Carol says serve on the board for organizations like VSO, Jazz Festival. Yep. Volunteer camp type activities. Absolutely, Dion. Yeah, so bringing these elements together is really just about brainstorming, throwing out a lot of ideas, and then finding the one that feels like, yeah, I really want to explore that. He could do any one of these things. So this is what he came up with, involvement in his church, organizing faith-based retreats and camps, using his skills for Habitat for Humanity, outdoor adventure, all of those things. He could try those things it's not to say that if he decides he doesn't want to serve on the projects for Habitat for Humanity after he's tried it, nothing has gone wrong. There's no mistakes. And I think that's what gets people tripped up, is they're afraid to make a mistake. Matt could do that. And then a year from now or 6 months from now, decide, you know what, that's not really, doesn't feel purposeful for me. He can go back to the map and choose something different. So our purpose will evolve over the years that we are in retirement. Again, think about it. It could last 30 or more years. Our purpose will evolve with us as we grow and evolve in retirement as well. So before I open it up to the questions, I'll leave you with this quote from the American Psychological Association. And they say, what's the key to a smooth retirement? Tend to your psychological portfolio as much as your financial one. So I hope I've given you some ideas on how to apply the map in your own planning or with others who might be approaching the retirement transition. How do we create a positive mindset? How do we use all the aspects of our authentic self to create that sort of purpose portfolio on the other side of our careers? If you have questions that you want to ask me personally, you can reach out to me by email or connect with me on LinkedIn. I post regularly on that. And if you're interested in going deeper, I launch my course a few times a year, the Curated Retirement. The next cohort is opening up on, next cohort starts on April 24th. So if you're interested in really developing your personalized retirement life plan, I do this over 6 weeks with videos and worksheets for you to work through to create your purpose portfolio on the other side of it. It offers a community of other people navigating this transition, other high achievers, and we meet weekly to discuss and go through the lessons and answer questions and get coaching on that. So I'd love for you to join me. If it feels like it's a right next step for you, feel free to reach out, and I'll provide Robert and his team with a link if you want to get on the wait list. So do you have any questions? Let me see. Sherry says, thank you for reframing the ideas about retirement. Give me lots to think about, and thank you for Robert and his team for facilitating. Yeah, thank you, Sherry. I hope you can take these concepts away and really start to apply it to, are there gaps in my planning? Do I need to address some of these aspects? So thank you for that. And thank you to Robert and Kadeem and the
Yeah, and I
team
was just
for
going to say, if
inviting
you
me.
have any questions and you want to chat, just raise your hand and I can unmute you or put them in the chat, and we can ask Tammy some difficult questions. That was excellent. Saw this Tuesday as well, and both times it had me thinking. Definitely wanted to throw in the AI version of myself, aged, right? My aged self.
Are you going to show it?
Should I?
Yes. I'll stop
Oh, okay,
sharing.
let me
I
see
think I
my
can.
aged self. Okay, wait, I'll find it.
It's so funny. Well, and when that the digitally aged research came out, it was
Yeah,
really around getting young people to save more money. And so when they showed young employees their aged avatars, it
yeah,
actually impacted their savings rate. So if you're trying to, that's good. That's a good one.
yeah. He looks
So if
so
you're,
serious, but it's typical. It's perfect because I'm still at work.
yeah,
That's aged me. Where's aged me? He's still at the office.
I love it.
I'm
I
not
love it.
smiling, Sherry, because I'm 75. I'm still working.
Well, your aged photo looks a lot younger than my aged photo, so
Because I already look 75, Tammy, and you only look 30. There you go.
oh yeah. Oh, so funny. But yeah, if you're trying to get your kid, if you have children, young adults who you're trying to encourage to
Yeah,
save, get them to do the aged
the
photo.
aging.
It'll impact their
Lisa has a question. I'm curious to know the percentage of people who do not struggle. Well, I can answer that in a way, Lisa, given, I've been doing this now for 26 years because I was 12 when I started. And I can tell you that meeting with hundreds of people, hundreds and probably thousands, most people struggle. And I think the people that struggle with it the most are the ones who try to make it only a financial decision, right? So
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. I've dealt with many retiring police officers and firefighters over the years. And the ones that definitely struggle the most are they try to make it a math question. And then when I answer the math question and explain to them, why they should retire, because it doesn't make financial sense to keep working, then they quickly realize it has nothing to do with the math. They're using that as a
Mhm.
crutch or an excuse, and
Yeah.
it's the emotional readiness. Like I've had people continue to work in some environments where they're making $2, $3 an hour, like actually
Yeah.
making $2 or $3 an hour working versus retired, and they don't retire because I tell
Mhm.
them don't go until you're emotionally ready. And it's a big thing. I mean, you spend 25 years, say you do live to 75, you're spending a third of your life in an occupation that you possibly invest a lot of your own personal identity and sense of worth to. And,
Yeah.
we talk about the other transitions too that really affect people. Like, quite often there's this correlation between when you're getting ready to retire and if you have children, when those children leave the nest. So it's a
Mhm.
double whammy, right? Like I spent an inordinate amount of time driving. We were talking about this, driving my kids to dance class and hockey, right? So then the kids go. and you're like, wait, I got a
Yeah,
lot of extra time now, right?
totally.
And then they take off and they go to uni. And so they're when they're going to university, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Well, yeah, and if you look at all of those things that often happen at the same time, like becoming an empty nester, a lot of
Right,
retirees downsize and move, all
right.
of those are on that stress scale that we talked about.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
my advice to people is don't do that all at once, right? That will
No.
just put you in such a stressful experience. So really, really be
I
intentional
usually
about
try to tell
staggering
people,
those things.
I tell people, and I'm not to be making a sexist kind of comment, but I feel like a lot of the time women are better prepared. They develop their social networks and that sense of belonging to things much earlier. So I tell the guys quite often, like, think about this 2 or 3 years before you retire, and think of, if I give you an extra 40 or 50 hours, right? And people say 40, well, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, plus the commuting time,
Hmm.
right? Another couple hours a day. So you're looking at 50 hours
Yeah,
of your waking life, and could call that's a lot of extra time. And
yeah,
developing a sense of routine is very important. So that's
yeah,
helped a lot of people, I'm going to
yeah.
get up tomorrow at the same time, right? This idea of, oh, I'm just going to sleep in. Well, it's not so good, right?
No.
People with dogs, I find, do very well. Very well. You know why? Because the dog's got to go for a walk.
Yeah, yeah,
Dogs, right?
yeah.
So people that
Yeah.
play sports, the skiers are very happy, not this year, but in general, because now you're not skiing on the weekend, right? So you get
Mhm.
up on a Monday, you look at cypress or grouse or whatever, and the next thing you know, you're up there for 3 hours and have your
Yeah.
lunch and you're good to go. Pickleball obviously has become ridiculously huge.
Yeah.
I find it's an addictive pursuit for my retirees.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and they go,
I hear so much about it too.
oh my
But I
God, you
think it's
get
really important too. It's not just filling the time, right?
right,
You can fill the time in a lot of different ways.
right,
Most of the people that I coach, they're lawyers, they're judges, they're physicians, they're people who they need something beyond just the pickleball and the
hmm,
skiing and right? Or walking the dog. It's like maybe it's serving on a board, maybe
yeah.
it is mentoring, writing a book. Like it needs, so
Yeah,
again, it's really,
anchoring to causes, I think, is very important, right?
mhm,
And at the same time, if you can anchor to a cause and contribute to using your expertise,
absolutely.
those ones, if people can match, like, I'm going to get involved for things where I'm not getting paid, but I'm really important to this cause. I have a couple of senior accountants that both joined Habitat for Humanity,
Yeah.
and that was great because they did a lot of the financial work
Yeah.
for it, right?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And the other thing that I think is really important too. So you'd mentioned first responders who might, they're eligible to retire often in their 40s, right? So
Mm.
police or fire.
50s.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's very
So
young,
young.
but
But
many of
they all
them
do this, they all
chose
do
that
this thing, Tammy, where
career.
they double dip. So they
Well,
go
many
back
of
to
them
work.
chose that career though because it's a calling. It's
Right.
not like the uniform represents a lot,
Right.
and many people they have chosen their careers because they feel like a calling. If that describes you, then it's
Right.
really important to find the kind of calling on the other
Hmm.
side of it, right? So
Hmm.
that's the work that we really dig into. It's like people who talk about their careers as a calling, not just a career. It's like this is
Hmm.
part of who I am. It's usually that they're using four or more of their strengths in their careers. So you
Right.
have to find that on the other side too.
Right.
So that's a piece that I think is really important.
Well, great. I
Dion
mean,
says old guy
we could
soccer.
talk about this stuff all day, and I
We
really,
could.
really appreciate you taking the time, Tammy, and
I,
hopefully some of the people will take you up on your offer and
yeah,
dive a little deeper here.
my pleasure.
So just
Thank
want
you,
to thank,
everyone.
yeah, thanks so much for everybody coming out. If you want Tammy's some information, you can reach out to us or reach out to her directly, and we'll put you in touch. But hope everybody enjoyed it. I think it went very well. And yeah, thanks again, Tammy. We'd love to have you back.
Thanks, everyone.